It was the year 1988, and in our small town, everything moved with the rhythm of a slow song. There were no mobile phones, no internet, and electricity came and went, like a shy guest. But faces carried smiles without reason, and every alley was lined with stories waiting to be told. I was 10 years old then, and every day felt like a new discovery. Our town sat on the quiet edge of Punjab, just a scatter of homes, dusty roads, and fields that smelled of rain and wheat. My mother was always the first to rise. There was no alarm clock, no digital beep. Just the sound of her copper bangles and the smell of roti rising from the stove that gently tugged us out of sleep. She would ride a small bicycle to the village. School. Yes, my mother was a teacher. Her scarf was always slipping off her shoulder and into her eyes, but I never once saw her stop the cycle to fix it. The school was no more than 3 rooms and a shaded veranda. Only 2 teachers taught there, my mother and Madame Shabana, who always held chalk like it was a weapon she was trained to use. I studied there too, and for me, my mother was more than a teacher. She was a kind of superhero, with ink on her fingers and poems in her pockets. In front of our house stood a tall rose tree. That tree was the keeper of secrets. Every petal on it had witnessed something: a game, a prayer, a whispered crush. During monsoon, when the rain turned the earth to perfume, the ground under that tree came alive with stories. That year's monsoon felt different. One morning, as rain poured endlessly from the sky, my mother decided not to go to school. She sat beside me on the veranda, wrapped in her shawl, a steaming cup of tea warming her hands. There was something soft in her eyes, like an old memory trying to find its way out. That year's monsoon felt different, do you know? She began. When I was your age, I used to play under that same rose tree. I looked at her, surprised. The same one. It's that old. She smiled. Your grandfather planted it. Every year, when the first flower bloomed, he'd bring me a box of sweets. He said the first rose of the season belonged to his daughter. I stared at the tree, as if trying to see my mother's childhood among its leaves. What happened after that? I asked. She took a deep breath. Then life moved on. He passed away. I grew up, but the tree stayed. It became my memory keeper. Just then, a voice called from the back. Water's getting into the house. Uncle Jamil, our neighbor, came running through the gate. We quickly put on slippers and followed him to the back. The drainage ditch had clogged, and water was flooding the backyard like a slow river. Uncle grabbed a shovel and started clearing it, and I stood beside him, helping as best I could. This happened almost every monsoon. Water would rise, ditches would overflow, and the town would come together. No complaints, no panic, just quiet cooperation. Later, everyone would gather under lanterns, sipping tea, telling stories. That night, the power went out, and we all sat under mosquito nets. My mother lit a lantern and began telling us a story. It was about a little girl during the War of 1965 who got separated from her mother, and how a rose tree helped her find her way back home. Was it this same rose tree? I asked. She smiled and kissed the top of my head, saying nothing. The next morning, I woke up to something strange. Beneath the rose tree was a small tin box. Inside was my favorite coconut barfi, neatly arranged. In wax paper, alongside it, a folded piece of paper. It read. The tin box stayed on my desk for days. I didn't eat the barfi. I didn't even touch it. Something about that little folded note inside the first flower belongs to a memory. This one is yours. Made it feel sacred, like a secret I hadn't earned yet. I asked my mother again where it came from. She smiled like someone who knew more than they were telling and said, maybe the tree gave it to you. She had that tone she used when I was younger, when she'd say the moon followed us home, or the wind carried our wishes to the stars. A part of me wanted to believe her. By the 4th day, the rain had washed the dust off the leaves, and the town sparkled in that strange post-monsoon light, where everything looks greener and older at the same time. I sat on the steps outside the house, looking at the rose tree. Its flowers had bloomed in full red, stubborn and bright, like they had something urgent to say. I don't know what pushed me to do it, but I stood up, walked over, and dug a little at the roots with my fingers. The soil was soft from rain, and barely a few inches in, my hand touched something hard. a rusted metal box. It was heavier than it looked. I wiped off the dirt with the bottom of my shirt and opened it. Inside, wrapped in plastic and yellowed paper, was a bundle of old things, a photograph, a wooden pencil, a dried-out marigold, and a letter, folded neatly and tied with twine. I didn't tell anyone. I took it to the back room, shut the door, and sat cross-legged on the floor with the box in my lap. My hands shook a little as I untied the twine. The paper was fragile and smelled of old trunks and mothballs. The writing was in blue ink, the kind that fades around the edges. The letter began, August 1965, to the one who finds this. My name is Ruxana. I am 10 years old. I have hidden this under the rose tree because I am scared. Today, the bombs fell near the station. My father says we are safe, but my mother hasn't returned since morning. She went to fetch my brother from the clinic. They didn't come back. I stopped reading and looked around the room. It felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in. I read on. If we leave before she returns, she won't know where to find us, so I am leaving this here. She always said this tree would remember things when we forgot them. So I'm asking the tree to remember her for me. I don't know where we'll go. Baba says Siakat is not safe. Maybe Lahore. Maybe Multan. I don't know. If you find this, please say her name out loud. Her name is Amina. She wears green bangles and hums while cooking. She is my mother. I stared at the paper for a long time. Ruxana would be older than my mother now. A grown woman. Maybe living in a city somewhere. Maybe with children of her own. Or maybe she was gone. Maybe this letter was all that was left of her. And Amina, her mother, had she ever found her way back? Had anyone ever said her name? I said it out loud. Quietly, almost like a prayer. Amina. It felt like something had settled in the room. Like a sigh from an invisible place. The photograph was next. It showed a little girl, about my age, standing under what looked like the same rose tree. She wore a white dress and held a stuffed toy rabbit in one hand. Her eyes were wide and serious, like she already knew life was not a thing to be taken lightly. On the back, someone had scribbled in pencil, for memory. In case we forget. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining Ruxana running through wet alleys, clutching the letter, hiding it in the mud. I wondered if anyone had ever told her that the rose tree still stood, still bloomed, still waited. And then a question formed in my mind, like a drop of rain forming at the edge of a leaf. Did my mother know? The next morning, as she chopped okra in the kitchen, I asked, trying to sound casual, Ammi, do you remember anyone named Ruxana from when you were a kid? She stopped chopping. The knife hovered above the board. Where did you hear that name? I froze. I hadn't expected such a sharp response. I just heard someone say it, I lied. She looked at me for a moment longer, then went back to chopping, slower now. There was a girl once, she said. We were the same age. She lived 2 streets over. Her family left suddenly during the war. No one saw them again. Did she have a rose tree? My mother's hands paused again, just for a second. Her mother planted one, I think. They had a small garden. That was all she said, but I could see the wheels turning behind her eyes. I didn't bring it up again. But 2 days later, I found her sitting under our rose tree. She was holding the photograph. I had hidden the box under my bed, but somehow, she had found it. Why? Didn't you tell me? She asked. I thought you'd take it away. She didn't answer, just kept looking at the photograph. I used to come here with her, she said finally. Ruxana, we'd pick petals, play teacher, steal mangoes. She always thought trees had memories. She'd whisper secrets into their bark, like they were old aunties. I smiled. That sounded like something I would do. We were playing outside the day the bomb fell. I remember the sky going orange, and her father yelling for her to come. Inside, after that, they were gone. Just gone. No goodbye. She ran her hand over the bark. I always thought she might come back, but she never did. I wanted to ask if she ever looked, but I didn't. Some silences deserve to stay whole. That night, the sky cracked open again. Rain poured down like grief. And just before the lights went out, there was a knock on the front gate. We weren't expecting anyone. My mother lit a lantern and walked out to the veranda. A woman stood there. Her clothes were soaked, her hair streaked with gray. She held an umbrella that had clearly given up long ago. "Can I help you?" my mother asked. The woman smiled slowly. "I hope so," she said. "I'm looking for a rose tree." My heart stopped. The woman looked at my mother. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something old and wordless. My mother stepped forward. "Ruxana." The woman nodded. They didn't hug. They just stood there, like people waking from a long dream, not sure if they were still asleep. "I found your letter," I said quietly. Ruxana looked down at me. She reached into her bag and pulled out a crumpled photograph. "The same one I had found. I kept a copy too," she said, in case I forgot her face. I took her hand and led her to the rose tree. The ground was wet and soft again. I placed the letter back in the box, along with the photograph, the pencil, and the marigold. Ruxana knelt beside me and whispered, "Thank you for remembering." And for the first time that night, the rain slowed. End of part 2, 2,000 words. Would you like a part 3 next? We can explore what happens now that Ruxana has returned. The truth about her mother, what else the rose tree remembers, and how the town begins to change. Let me know. Ask ChatGPT. After Ruxana returned, time moved strangely in the town. Days stretched longer. Conversations seemed heavier. The rose tree bloomed harder, as if trying to make up for the years it had been waiting. She didn't stay at our house. Instead, she rented the old Shahani place down the lane, the one with the cracked blue shutters and the sagging porch no one had touched since the early 70s. People said ghosts lived there, but Ruxana didn't flinch when she saw it. She paid 3 months in advance, cleaned it herself, and started sweeping dust like she'd done it all her life. By the second day, a dog started following her. By the third, kids would leave flowers on her steps. She became part of the town again, like a clock started ticking that had stopped back in 1965. But something about her felt distant. She smiled, yes. She laughed softly when someone teased her about her umbrella with the missing ribs. But her eyes searched corners when no one was looking, like they were looking for something that hadn't yet arrived. One afternoon, I took her a bowl of my mother's rice pudding. She thanked me, placed it on a wooden stool, and motioned for me to sit with her on the front steps. "Do you still remember her?" I asked. She didn't ask who. She knew I do, she said. "Some days I think I see her in the street market, or hear her humming near the stove." She looked at me. Grief doesn't grow smaller with time. It just learns how to sit quietly. Nodded, though I only half understood. Then I said, "The tree still remembers her." Ruxana smiled. "That tree always listened better than people." We sat in silence. The sun began to set behind the tall wheat fields. The wind carried the scent of cardamom and wet stone. Then she asked something I didn't expect. "Do you want to see where she lived?" I blinked. "You mean, your old house?" She stood up, brushed her hands on her shalwar, and nodded. "It's still here. Hasn't changed much. Just got quieter." We walked together, past the tailor's shop, past the mosque, past the small pharmacy with a hand-painted sign. Then we turned down an alley I rarely went through. The houses here were older, some empty, some turned to storage spaces. Vines grew unchecked over the bricks. We stopped at a narrow gate with rusted hinges. "This is it." The yard was overgrown, but the outline of a garden still remained. A stone path led to a small door with peeling green paint. My mother planted jasmine along that wall, she said softly. I tried to picture the house filled with life. I couldn't. We stepped inside. Dust clung to the walls like it belonged. A cracked mirror hung by the door. A small iron stove stood in the corner, its surface covered in cobwebs. Ruxana ran her hand along the wall and stopped near a wooden panel. "She used to keep her bangles here," she said, tapping a spot in the paneling. She gave it a small push, and to my surprise it creaked open, revealing a hollow. Inside was a tin bangle box. She opened it. The green bangles inside had not faded. She held one to the light. It caught the sun for a moment, then trembled in her hand. She always wore these on Eid, she whispered. We stood in the room a while longer. Then Ruxana folded the bangles into a cloth and placed them gently into her bag. Outside, the wind had changed. The sky darkened. Rain again. But not the heavy kind. Just a soft curtain of mist. As we walked back, she said, There's something strange. I never told anyone. I looked at her. After we left, I had dreams of her, standing under the tree, waiting. Every year on my birthday, I'd see the same thing. Did she say anything? She'd say, I'm not lost. I'm just waiting for the right eyes. I didn't know what it meant until you found the letter. We reached her porch, and she placed a hand on my head. Thank you for having the right eyes. That night, I sat on our sharp eye staring at the rose tree. It swayed gently, even though the air was still. I thought about dreams, about memories waiting like unopened letters. The next morning, my mother was already awake, sitting under the tree with a bundle in her lap. It was a wooden box, different from the one I'd found before. This belonged to my father, she said, opening it slowly. Inside were old photographs, a compass, a watch, and a leather-bound notebook. She opened the notebook and turned to a marked page. He was the one who helped Ruxana's family leave, she said. I leaned in. There were people in the town who believed anyone helping refugees was a traitor. My father kept quiet about it, but he knew where they went. He wrote it all here. She tapped the page. A letter he never sent, addressed to Ruxana. She handed it to me. The ink was faded, but legible. Ruxana, your mother was found 3 days after you left. She had injuries but survived. She went to the station daily, hoping you'd return. I tried to send word, but couldn't reach you. She passed in 72, still asking about you. I am sorry I never found the words to tell you this. I didn't speak. Neither did my mother. Should we give it to her? I asked. She nodded. When I handed the letter to Ruxana, she didn't cry. She held it to her chest, closed her eyes, and whispered something under her breath. A prayer, maybe, or a goodbye. The next few days passed slowly. The sky stayed gray. The fields held the rain like secrets. Then, one evening, Ruxana asked my mother if she could reopen the old school building, the one where they had both studied as children. It hadn't been used in years. I want to teach again, she said, not big classes, just stories, memory, how to keep things safe. They cleaned the rooms together, repainted the walls. Children from the neighborhood started showing up, curious at first, then eager. Ruxana taught them how to fold paper boats, how to press flowers in books, how to write letters they may never send. And always, before each lesson, she would light a small candle and place it near the window. For those still waiting, she'd say. The town began to change, gently. A bakery reopened. The cobbler started fixing shoes again, instead of only playing cards. People began painting their doors. The rose tree, for the first time in years, dropped petals like rain. Then, just as quietly as she came, Ruxana left. No goodbye, no note, only the school key on our doorstep, and the rose tree blooming one final red flower that season, brighter than any before. It had been 10 days since Ruxana left. 10 quiet days, filled with mornings that smelled like cardamom and wet clothes, and nights where the tree dropped petals, as if grieving. She didn't tell anyone she was leaving. No visit, no farewell. She simply disappeared, leaving behind her umbrella, the one with the broken ribs, leaning against the rose tree as if it, too, had finished waiting. I missed her, in the small ways. The way she'd hum old movie songs while sweeping our porch. The way she taught children how to seal letters with wax and tuck them into their math books. But mostly I missed how she made the town feel full. Like her very presence had opened up rooms in people's hearts they hadn't entered in years. The school stayed closed after she left. My mother tried to reopen it once, but it didn't feel right. It was hers, she said simply, and it knew her voice. Still, every few days, I'd go sit inside the empty classroom. The chalkboard still had faded words from her last lesson. Who will you remember? The children had drawn flowers all around it. One such afternoon, While dusting the shelves, I found a worn envelope tucked behind a stack of old books. My name was written on it, in Ruxana's thin, careful handwriting. I opened it slowly. To the boy who listened, it said, "I don't know where I'm going, only that it's time to go. The rose tree gave me what I needed. Now I must return something. There's a compass in your grandfather's box. It doesn't point north. It points to the last thing he promised. Find it. It belongs to you now." I ran back home, heart thudding. My mother was in the kitchen, kneading dough. I didn't wait. I pulled out Nana's wooden box from the cupboard under the sharp eye and lifted the lid. The compass lay in the corner, beside the photographs and the old watch. It was heavier than I remembered. The glass was scratched, and the needle didn't. Sit still, it jerked, trembled, and pointed east, toward the railway tracks. I showed it to my mother. She wiped her hands and held it in her palm, silent for a while. "He used to carry it everywhere," she said, "even after he stopped traveling. He said it would guide him to unfinished business." "Do you think he meant Ruxana?" She shook her head. "I think he meant a promise, something he never delivered." The next morning, I left early. I followed the compass needle, past the marketplace, past the post office, and all the way to the railway station. The platform was nearly empty. An old man was sweeping dust off the tracks. A tea vendor was boiling milk on a coal stove. The compass kept pointing toward the old freight shed behind the station. It was locked, a rusted iron padlock with no key in sight. I walked around the side and found a loose panel in the wooden wall. Slipping through, I found myself inside a room filled with crates, broken fans, and dust that danced like ghosts in the sunbeams. In one corner, under a tarp, was a small wooden chest with brass corners. I lifted it. It wasn't locked. Inside were dozens of folded letters. Some had names. Some were sealed with red wax. Others had faded ink and torn corners. But they all had one thing in common. They were unsent. Letters, never delivered. Each one had a date, most between 1965 and 1970. Some addressed to people I had never heard of. One caught my eye. It was addressed to Miss Ruxana A. The return address was the school. I read it. "My dear Ruxana, your mother is safe. She was found near the cantonment and treated at the base hospital." I tried sending word through the postmaster, but he refused, said it would draw attention. "I kept your letter, the one you buried, hoping someday you'd return and I could give it back. I write this hoping it finds you, even if I never do. MH, my grandfather, Mahmud Hassan." He had tried. He had written back. But something stopped the letter from ever reaching her. I sat there for what felt like hours, reading letter after letter, stories frozen in pages. A son who had run away during a curfew. A sister in Siakat who hadn't been seen since the floods. A teacher writing to a boy who'd never collected his report card. They were all memories with no addresses left to visit. I packed the letters into my satchel and brought them home. That night, my mother and I sat cross-legged on the floor and sorted them by hand. She recognized some of the names. Others rang no bells. "What will you do with them?" she asked. "I want to give them back," I said. "To whom?" "To whoever is still listening." For the next week, I became the town's unofficial postman. I visited old homes, knocked on doors, asked around. Most people stared at me in disbelief. Some cried when they saw the letters. Some shook their heads and said the person was long gone. But each time I handed one over, I saw something shift, like a curtain lifted, or a wound quietly stitched. One morning, I found myself at the tailor's shop. The tailor, an old man named Hashmat, was stitching quietly under a ceiling fan that clicked every few seconds. I handed him a letter. He opened it slowly. His lips moved silently as he read. Then he looked up. "This is from my brother," I thought. "He died in the border camp." He folded the letter and placed it in his shirt pocket like it was made of gold. "You brought back a heartbeat," he said. Word began to spread. People started coming to our door, asking if we had letters for them. Some came from neighboring towns. The old school turned into a makeshift post office. My mother and I sorted everything with candlelight and careful hands. One day, I opened a letter addressed to Sarah J. Library Room. It was from a boy named Imran, written in 1966. A poem, handwritten. Each line ended with the same phrase, "I will find you." We placed it on the board beside the rose tree, under a sign that read, "If your name is here, a memory awaits." The rose tree bloomed wildly that week. Then came the parcel. It arrived by hand. A man from Lahore, wearing a faded kurta and leather sandals, said someone had given it to him at a tea stall. The note attached read, "To the keeper of letters. Thank you for giving me my mother back. I'm sending something she always meant to return. Your grandfather's promise completed." Our inside was a cloth-wrapped bundle. I opened it slowly. Inside was a small wooden stamp, carved with intricate vines and a single word in Urdu, Yad memory, and beneath it, a framed photo. My grandfather, standing beside a young woman, Ruxana's mother, both of them smiling under the rose tree. My mother wept when she saw it. She placed the photo on the windowsill beside her stove. That night, as the rain returned, soft and slow, like the beginning of a lullaby, I lit a candle and sat under the rose tree. I held the compass, now still, its needle no longer twitching. Because sometimes, when you finish what someone else began, the path no longer needs to be shown. It's already home. By the time my mother returned from the Haveli, the rain had stopped, but the town hadn't stirred. There was a hush in the air, as if every rooftop and window shutter had been listening for her footsteps. She came in with her shawl soaked, her eyes looking older than they had the night before. She didn't speak to anyone, not even to me. She went straight to her sewing trunk. I watched from the edge of the room as she opened an old wooden box with brass latches, carved with floral vines. It was filled with neat stacks of fabric, threads in shades of marigold and clove, and a velvet pouch where she kept her embroidery needles. She reached into the bottom of the trunk and pulled out something I had never seen before. A bundle wrapped in muslin cloth. She sat cross-legged on the floor and carefully opened the bundle. Inside was a half-finished shawl, cream-colored, hand-stitched with delicate vines and petals in crimson and gold. But one side was incomplete, the thread still looped through the needle, hanging like a sentence never finished. I crouched beside her. "What is that?" She didn't answer. Her fingers traced the edges of the cloth, and a long silence passed before she whispered, "This was hers." "Whose?" "My sister's." I blinked. I'd never heard of a sister. Her name was Nazo, my mother said. Not Sneen, really, but no one ever called her that. She was older than me, the kind who never waited for rain to dance, the kind who used rosewater as perfume and henna as ink. I said nothing, afraid the spell of the memory might break if I spoke. She vanished in 1965, my mother said. On the same day the rose tree first bloomed for the season, I felt the back of my neck tingle. They said she ran away. Some whispered she crossed the border. Others claimed the war swallowed her, but I knew she left this behind for a reason. She ran her hand across the shawl again. She was stitching this the week before she vanished. She told me she'd finish it for our mother's birthday, but it never happened, and I kept it hidden all these years, thinking maybe if I finished it, I'd understand where she went. I stared at the shawl, a missing sister, a half-finished story in silk, and something inside me began to turn like a key in an old lock. "You want to finish it now?" I asked. My mother looked at me, a softness in her eyes. "Not yet," she said. "First, I need to remember the stitch she used. It wasn't an ordinary one. It was something she made up. Something she said only she and I knew." She closed the trunk. "I need to find it." That afternoon, my mother didn't go to school. Instead, she went to the town library. I followed at a distance, watching her ask the old librarian if they still had the school registers from the 1960s. The librarian looked surprised, but eventually unlocked the cabinet and handed her a dusty ledger. It was heavy and smelled of dried glue. I sat across from her as she turned the pages. Class names, teacher notes, attendance markings. Then, finally, her name. Natsneen Bibi, Class IX, discontinued, July 1965. Beside her name, in faint pencil, was a note, left without notice, no forwarding information. Family did not claim certificate. My mother stared at that line for a long time. Then she said she was already gone by then. We walked home slowly. The monsoon air was thick, not with rain, but with questions. I felt like we were following the ghost of someone who once lived in the shape of thread and sent in silence that night. After dinner, I went to the rose tree. I don't know why. Maybe because it had always been a marker. The tree that saw her go. The tree that welcomed the rains each year and stood like a witness no one had called. I knelt down by its trunk, where the roots lifted from the soil like old fingers, and I dug. At first it was just mud and stones, then an old bangle, then a fragment of blue glass. Then, at the depth of my wrist, a metal button. It was oval-shaped, green enamel over brass. I wiped it clean with my shirt and noticed something carved on the underside. A letter N. I took it inside. My mother was still awake, sitting by the lamp and sorting through a pile of old cerise. I placed the button on her lap. She looked at it for a long time. This was from her school uniform, she said quietly. She stitched it on, herself, to feel different. The next morning, my mother didn't speak much. She simply tied her hair, wrapped the shawl around her shoulders, and walked out into the town. I knew where she was going, the Haveli. I didn't follow her this time. I waited. Hours passed. The rain returned in light drizzles. A sparrow perched on the rose tree. I sat with the unfinished shawl in my lap, running my fingers over the loose thread, wondering what the last stitch might have been. It didn't look like the regular cross-stitch she had taught me. It looped and twisted in a way that reminded me of the climbing vines behind the mosque wall. Suddenly, I remembered something in our school's art room. There was an old embroidery guidebook. Nobody ever used it. It just lay on the top shelf, gathering dust, with a cover faded by sun. I ran there at once. The school was quiet midday, everyone gone for lunch. I climbed the shelf carefully and pulled the book down. Flipped page after page. Chain stitch, herringbone, feather stitch, stem stitch, blanket stitch, and finally Nasneen's knot. I froze. It was right there. A picture of the exact stitch on the shawl. The caption read, "A unique blend between chain and fly stitch, locally referred to as Nasneen's knot, named after a student embroiderer from Punjab, 1964. I nearly dropped the book. I ran home and shoved the page in front of my mother as she returned. She stared at it, then she smiled. She did it, she whispered. She left something behind. That evening, we spread the shawl on the sharp-eye in the courtyard. The sky was copper. With twilight, the rain finally exhausted. My mother threaded the needle, and with her fingers steady but eyes wet, she began to finish her sister's work. Stitch by stitch, the vine came to life again. We didn't say a word for an hour. Only the crickets spoke, and the needle whispered. Through the cloth, when she tied the final knot, my mother looked up at the rose tree, and then, with a breath that sounded like both a prayer and a goodbye, she said, she never left. She just changed form. That night, we laid the shawl on the edge of the bed. It smelled of sandalwood and silence. The next morning, a letter was found at our doorstep. There was no name, no sender, no handwriting we recognized. Just a piece of parchment, old and curling, with one sentence written in Urdu. Some memories refused to vanish. They stitched themselves into the next life. Inside was a black and white photograph. 2 girls sitting under the rose tree. One was clearly my mother. The other, eyes sharp, smile full. A flower in her braid was the girl I now knew as Nazo. The background was unmistakable. The carved steps of the HAVLI in her hand. The same shawl. The air was thick with the scent of cardamom and wet clay. That morning, the town awoke slower than usual, lulled by the constant drumming of rain against windows and tin rooftops. It had rained all night, and the streets of our little town now glistened like glass. School had been cancelled. Ganan, the younger children, splashed through the puddles barefoot, their laughter echoing between shuttered shops and low verandas. I stayed sitting cross-legged on the woven mat by the window, pencil in hand, and my school notebook open before me. But I wasn't writing sums or practicing Urdu calligraphy. I was copying something far more exciting, an inventory of names and strange Marks from the back of the ledger we'd found in the old tea house. The ledger was worn at the edges, its pages yellowed and curled like dried leaves. Mama had dusted it gently, and even Baba, who usually called things like this Radhika Kakra, had squinted at it with more curiosity than annoyance. It was a strange book. The front pages were ordinary enough. Names, prices, tea orders. But the last dozen pages had lists that didn't belong in a tea house. Names followed by symbols, sometimes little notes in English, and others in a cramped script we hadn't yet identified. Some names were crossed out. Others had arrows drawn beside them. There were circles, stars, and in 2 cases, smudges that looked like they'd been rubbed over in panic. One name stood out, Rafiq Dodd, written 3 times, once with a red circle around it, once crossed out, and finally, on the last page, alone, with nothing beside it but the faint word, remember. I traced the word with my pencil, copying it into my notebook, then copying the symbol next to it, a hand with 3 fingers bent. It looked like a strange blessing or a half-drawn bird. Mama noticed. "Careful with that," she said, peering over my shoulder. "That mark, I've seen it before." I turned to her, wide-eyed. "Where?" "In a letter," she said slowly. "Years ago, one that came after the war. It was unsigned, and your Nana burned it. But before he did, I remember seeing that same symbol in the top corner." The rain fell harder. Thunder rolled in the distance. That was enough to make us both look up. Something wasn't right. The rain was louder than usual. No, not louder. Closer. Like it was falling inside the house. I ran to the back veranda. The corner roof tile had come loose, and water was dripping fast into the storage room. Bubba and Uncle Jamil were already there, barefoot, slipping on the wet cement floor, trying to haul old boxers away from the leak. They weren't just boxers. I saw it clearly as one burst open. Film reels, rolls of exposed negatives, and brittle photo paper. Old, all carefully labeled in chalk. My grandfather's writing. Bubba froze. "I thought we lost these." Uncle Jamil chuckled, wiping his face. "You buried them here yourself, remember? When the new landlord came, and you thought he'd shut down the photography studio." I moved closer. One of the negatives had fallen into the water and was spreading like ink, but another lay dry on top. It showed a young woman in a sari, holding a stack of books in one hand and what looked like a small puppet in the other. "Who is she?" I asked. Baba hesitated. "Your mother will know." We took the negatives inside and laid them on towels near the fireplace. Mama squinted at them for a long time. When she saw the one with the puppet, she grew quiet. "That's Fauzia, Baji," she said finally. "She taught music and crafts." "Before the accident." "What accident?" I asked. Mama sat down. "She disappeared during the 1977 protests. Some say she ran away. Others say they came for her. The mark you copied earlier, that's what she used to draw on the blackboard before she'd teach." I felt my chest tighten. The ledger, the symbol, the photograph pointing toward something that had been carefully hidden. Mama walked to her bookshelf and pulled down an old poetry collection. Tucked between the pages was a folded brown envelope. She opened it. Inside was a torn paper square, and on it, drawn in the same shaky lines, the 3-fingered hand. "She left this in my bag the day she vanished," Mama said. "I never told anyone, but maybe it's time." She led me to the rose tree in the courtyard. Rain had painted the leaves dark and glossy, and the air smelled earthy, like it always did after a hard pour. She bent down near the roots and pulled away some loose soil. There, buried just beneath the surface, was a tin lunchbox wrapped in plastic inside. A stack of hand-drawn posters, faded tickets to a theater performance called Dust and Daughters, a photo of a young Fauzia surrounded by students, and a rolled parchment with names. I unfolded it. The first line read, "Those who vanished were never silent." Each name had a symbol beside it. Some familiar from the tea house ledger. Some new. My heart raced. "What is all this?" I asked. Mama took the list gently from me. This was her archive. She was building something. A record, I think, of artists, teachers, thinkers, anyone who disappeared or was silenced during the martial law years. I stared at the parchment. The name Rafiq Dodd was there too. Next to it, not a symbol, but a short sentence. He knows where the tapes are. That night, I couldn't sleep. My room felt colder, darker, as if the rain had seeped into the walls. I lay under my quilt and stared at the ceiling, the tapes. That had to mean the audio reels from the old drama group. My grandfather had spoken about them once, recordings of radio plays, band songs, whispered poems. Lost, he'd said. What if they weren't? I got up. Mama was still awake, boiling water for tea. I sat beside her. "We have to find the tapes," I said. She looked at me with surprise, then nodded. "We will." The next morning, I rode my bicycle to the far end of town, where the market stalls began to thin out and the train station curved, around the back of the Gurdwara wall. There, past the sugarcane vendor and behind a tin shed repair shop, was a building I'd only ever seen closed. It was called Mohan Video Center. The paint was faded, the windows foggy, but the front door was open, and an old man was sweeping the porch. "You're Rafiq Dodd?" I asked. He turned, narrowed his eyes, and gave a crooked smile. "Depends who's asking. I'm Safa's daughter. She used to teach here. You knew her friend Fauzia, Badji." He dropped the broom. After a moment, he motioned me inside. The shop smelled of dust and plastic and old cassette cases. Shelves lined the walls, though most were empty. In the back was a trapdoor. He pulled it open. "You'll want to be careful," he said. "Some of those reels are brittle. But there, all their drama tapes, poetry nights, speeches, songs, things we weren't allowed to play back then." I descended slowly. The basement was dark, lit only by the narrow shaft of light from the trapdoor. But there they were, boxers labeled in chalk. Some said Fauzia, others said Samar, and one simply read Freedom. I picked up one. Real. It had the symbol on it, the hand with 3 bent fingers. "We need to listen to them," I whispered. "Start with tape 5, Rafiq said. That one changed everything." It began with a whisper note, louder than a mosquito's hum. It came from the far end of the house, where the attic door had swung open just slightly during the last windstorm. And somehow, even before we saw what was inside, we knew it wasn't just dust and old trunks waiting up there. Nazia was the first to climb the creaking staircase. I followed, a torch in my hand and heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped cricket. The attic smelled of dried wood, old fabric, and something faintly metallic. Cobwebs hung like lace curtains between broken chairs and rusted lanterns. But there, behind a collapsed easel, was a small wooden box with a faded red thread wrapped around its latch. Nazia knelt before it. Her fingers trembled a little as she untied the thread. The latch gave way with a soft clink, and she slowly opened the lid. Inside lay a worn notebook, its corners curled, its cover dark green and almost velvety in texture. The first page was blank, except for a name written in the center in blue fountain pen ink, Saira. My breath caught in my throat. That was the name on the letter we had found earlier, the name of the girl who had vanished in 1965. We sat cross-legged on the attic floor. The thunder outside rolled gently now, like someone slowly dragging a chair across the sky. I turned the page. The handwriting inside was neat, delicate, and slanted ever so slightly to the right. Each line was written with care, as though the writer were whispering to the page rather than speaking. It wasn't a diary, not exactly. It was a collection of letters, none of them sent. All of them addressed to someone named Samir. "Dear Samir, today the rain came back, and with it, the taste of your last words. I keep looking at the rose tree, wondering if it remembers what you said under it. That maybe has stretched across my chest like a tight thread, refusing to snap." It was dated July 3rd, 1965. Another read, "Dear Samir, the night you left, I dreamt of a brass lantern floating in the canal. I think it was yours. It was upright, glowing from within, even in the water. Someone whispered my name in the dream, but I couldn't turn around. I was afraid if I did, the voice would vanish." July 9th, 1965. The entries continued, gentle and poetic. capturing fragments of a girl's longing, her confusion, and a silence that deepened with every page. She loved him, Natsia said softly, and she was waiting for someone who never returned, I asked, or for someone who couldn't. We took the notebook downstairs, where Amma sat on the charpai, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The power had gone out again, and the house was dim, lit only by 2 lanterns, one in the lounge and one in the kitchen. As I handed her the notebook, she stared at the name on the cover for a long moment. Her fingers slowly brushed the word, Sarah. I knew her, Oma whispered. We sat, stunned. She was a senior at my school when I was in class 4, beautiful, sharp, always wore white. Like she believed she was made of lightning. The teachers adored her. But there were whispers about a boy who lived across the canal. A boy from the other side. Samir, I asked. I nodded. Samir, his father was a clerk at the railway station. They were planning to move to Lahore. The day before they left, he came to see her. People said they fought under the rose tree, some said they kissed. No one knows for sure. The next morning, Syra was gone. What do you mean gone? She didn't come to school. Her parents searched. The police were called, but nothing. Her last known sighting was at dawn, walking along the canal road. The room fell silent, broken only by the ticking of the old wall clock. Do you think something happened to her? Natsia asked gently. Amma exhaled deeply. Some say she drowned herself. Others believed she ran away, but no body was ever found. Natsia reached into the box again and pulled out something wrapped in old newspaper. As she unfolded it, I saw an old pair of silver anklets, dulled with time, and beneath them, a dried rosette's petals blackened but still whole. That night, I barely slept. The wind rattled the windows, and every creak in the house sounded like footsteps. In my dreams, I saw a girl in white walking along the canal road. Her back was to me, and in her hand was a brass lantern, glowing faintly. I awoke with a start. It was nearly dawn. I tiptoed to the rose tree, barefoot, my breath visible in the cool air. The ground was wet with dew, and the petals above glistened, like they'd been painted. And then I saw it, a piece of paper wedged into the bark. It was damp, but intact. I pulled it gently and unfolded it. It was a letter. Dear whoever finds this, if you're reading this, then the tree still stands, and the monsoon has returned. I never meant to vanish. I was only looking for the quiet. I left my name behind so someone would remember me not as a story, but as a person. If you read my notebook, know that I loved deeply, but I also feared the world would not let me. Please, keep the tree safe. Let it bloom, let it whisper. Saira, my hands shook. I didn't know how long it had been there, or if the monsoon had unearthed it, but something told me it had waited for decades, maybe for someone to notice. At breakfast, I showed Amma the note. She read it in silence, her lips pressed tight. Then she did something unexpected. She took a match and lit the edge of the letter. It curled, burned, and turned to ash on the breakfast tray. Some stories, she said, deserve to end in silence. But Natsia and I couldn't let it go. We returned to the attic, searching for anything else. Photographs, more letters, clues. We found nothing new, but the notebook lingered with us. We read it like scripture, careful not to smudge its ink. We learned about Sarah's dreams of studying abroad, of writing poetry, of climbing mango trees barefoot. She was no ghost. She had been alive so brilliantly, so completely alive. One evening, as the sun dipped low, we decided to walk along the canal road. Amma warned us not to stay out after dusk, but we promised to be quick. The air was thick with the smell of wet earth. The canal glimmered like a broken mirror, and dragonflies danced above the surface. We walked in silence, occasionally spotting wild jasmine and marigolds sprouting along the banks. About half a kilometer in, we saw something. A broken wooden post, half buried in mud, and beside it, a rusted lantern, its glass cracked but its frame intact. Nazia, gasped Smears. I knelt and picked it up. It was heavier than I expected. Inside, something rattled. I unscrewed the base and found a folded piece of paper, yellowed and brittle. Samir's handwriting, Sarah. I came to say goodbye, but I couldn't find you. I think your father knew. He told me never to return, but I will, someday. If you're still waiting, leave a rose on the tree. I'll come for it." That letter had never been received. We carried it home like sacred cargo. That night, we placed a fresh rose on the tree. We didn't know what we hoped would happen, perhaps nothing, but it felt right. For the first time in weeks, I slept peacefully. And in my dream, Sarah stood by the tree, no longer with her back turned. She smiled at me, a rose tucked behind her ear. There was peace in her face, and the lantern no longer glowed. There was an odd stillness in the air that afternoon. The monsoon sky was an endless bruise above the town, thick with purple-gray clouds, sagging with rain but refusing to weep. I sat on the ledge of the courtyard, running my fingers along the grooves of a rusting lantern. The rose tree, now heavy with late blooms, shifted lightly in the faintest wind, as if unsure whether to dance or brace itself. "Don't play outside for too long today," Amma warned from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "The rain's been waiting all day. It'll come hard and fast once it starts." I nodded, though I had no plans to venture far. The streets were wet with leftover puddles from yesterday, and everyone in town seemed to be holding their breath. Even the chaiwala at the corner hadn't opened his stall. The radio hummed low inside the house, broadcasting government announcements in between folk songs that no longer sounded cheerful. Earlier that morning, a man had arrived from the canal, authority, covered in dust and sweat, his bicycle laden with bundles of papers and maps. He spoke to Baba at length behind closed doors, his voice low and urgent. I only heard snippets: water rising fast, upstream blockage, chance of spillover, breach not impossible. By noon, Baba had sent Babar and Gnome to help sandbag the schoolyard wall. Not just our school hall buildings that sat low or backed onto the riverbank were being fortified. I was told to stay home, but I didn't feel frightened. Not exactly. It was more like standing at the edge of a story that hadn't yet decided whether to be a comedy or a tragedy. I wandered into Uma's room, where the old photo album lay open. The pages had curled slightly from the humidity, and her handwriting lined the borders like ivy. I turned to a photograph I had studied before. A group of women gathered outside the same school, maybe 20 years earlier. They were carrying books and baskets. In the center stood Umahar braided with jasmine, smiling with a stubborn light in her eyes. Next to her was a woman I didn't recognize, taller, thinner, with a distant sadness in her face, but her hand rested gently on Ima's shoulder. I traced the outline of the unknown woman with my finger. Something about her haunted me. I didn't know why. When Amma came in carrying a tray of lemon water, I asked casually, "Amma, who is this?" She glanced at the photo, and her face stiffened slightly. She set the tray down and sat beside me. "That was Miss Sophia," she said finally. "She taught at the school for only 1 year. 1968. Why only 1 year? She disappeared. One morning she simply didn't come. Her house was empty, clothes gone, furniture left behind. No one ever found out where she went. Was she from here? No. She came from Lahore, they said. Came to teach village girls. She was different. Wore green bangles, even on rainy days. Danced when it thundered. What did you think of her?" Amma looked down at her hands. "I was just a girl. But I remember she used to say, never underestimate the power of a schoolyard. Revolution begins in tiny places." She was the first to put henna on my hands. There was a silence between us. I watched the rose tree outside, its petals beginning to tremble now. "Do you think she was in trouble?" I asked. Amma didn't answer. She picked up the photo album and gently closed it. "Go tell your brothers to bring in the goat," she said instead. The storm's finally coming. Outside, the air had thickened like soup. The clouds above had started to move in great circles, slow and patient, like a hawk about to dive. Baba stood with Uncle Jamil at the front gate, talking to several other men from the neighborhood. Their clothes were soaked in sweat and grit. "We'll barricade the well and lay rope between the roofs," Baba said. "If the flood comes in the dark, we'll need to move across roofs to reach each other." "We should ring the mosque bell early," said another man. "No use waiting." Down the street, I saw Madame Shabana helping her elderly mother into a small wooden cart. Her daughter Samra was tying bundles of clothes in plastic sheets. The entire street was transforming into a quiet evacuation zone, though no one used the word aloud. I ran to find Baba and Noam. They were near the school, shoveling soil and stacking bricks against the back wall. When they saw me, they dropped their tools and wiped sweat from their brows. "Any news?" Baba asked. "Amma says the rain's coming." "Baba's planning ropes and barricades." Noam laughed dryly. Typical Baba, always preparing for the worst. But maybe he's right this time. We walked back together in silence. That evening, just as the call to Mograb echoed through the town, the first crack of thunder split the sky. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, like something ancient waking up. A second clap followed, then another. The rose tree swayed violently, and the first drops fell in fast. Fat splashes. By the time we had sealed the windows with cloth and laid mats along the thresholds, the rain had turned into a sheet of silver. We could barely see the street from Rverandah. Inside, Amma moved quickly. She handed each of us a satchel bread, lentils, a small bottle of rosewater, a torch, and one set of dry clothes. She wasn't panicked, just purposeful. "We'll sleep on the roof if the water enters," she said. "The neighbors' ladders are tied. Stay close to each other." Just before midnight, the water came. It didn't come roaring like in the movies. It came quietly, in whispers, first through the cracks in the kitchen wall, then bubbling up through the courtyard drain. By the time we noticed, our toes were wet. Baba waded through knee-deep water to secure the main gate. Amma clutched her prayer beads and moved our valuables to the highest shelf. I stood near the rose tree, watching the lower branches vanish beneath the rising water. Then, something drifted toward me, small and square. It was the tin box, the one that had held coconut barfi weeks ago. It bumped gently against my leg. I picked it up, opened it. Inside, folded carefully, was a yellowed letter and a piece of green glass. I opened the letter with shaking hands. "To whoever finds this," it began, in a graceful cursive. "This rose tree is the only witness left to my secret. I planted it again after the fire. The old one was burned. They said women like me had no place in schools, no place in villages. But I had henna on my hands and chalk in my pocket, and I wouldn't leave without planting a memory. If the floods come again, know that I once loved this town, even if it never learned to love me back." It was signed simply, Sophia. I read the letter twice, then showed it to Uma. Her face froze, eyes scanning the words like she couldn't believe they existed. "I knew she never just left," Uma whispered. "I knew something wasn't right." The water reached the steps then, slapping gently against the base of the house. "We need to go up," Baba called. We climbed to the roof, one by one. From there, we saw the town transformed. The roads were gone. The fields were small lakes. Lights flickered from rooftops. Lanterns bobbed across ropes tied between homes. In the distance, the schoolhouse stood silent. The wall bobber and gnome, built held for now, and the rose tree swayed beneath the black sky. Only its highest branch above the flood, one final red bloom clinging to life. My mother sat across from me at the old kitchen table, her hands clasped around a steel cup of lukewarm tea. Her eyes weren't focused on me, nor the cup, but somewhere behind the monsoon's mist that clung to the kitchen window like a forgotten memory. Her voice, when it came, felt like a spool of silk unraveling slowly. "She wrote me a letter," my mother whispered. "Razia." I blinked. "Razia, Auntie." She nodded, then reached into her drawer and pulled out a folded sheet of paper, wrapped in a transparent polythene sleeve, slightly wrinkled at the edges and tinted amber by time. She placed it on the table with the reverence of someone placing a photograph of the dead. I never replied. She said. My fingers hesitated as I reached for it. "Can I read it?" She didn't answer. I looked at me, then nodded once. Solemnly, I peeled back the sleeve and unfolded the letter. The ink had faded into a sepia tone, and the penmanship was delicate, almost shy. There were faint splotches at the bottom corner, either watermarks or TEARDROPS, Dear Farida. You once told me that a girl who writes in chalk leaves no mark on the world, that we must write in ink or in fire, or we'd be forgotten. I have written you this letter in henna, not the kind you place on your hands before Eid, but the kind that stains memory slowly, darkening with time. I am writing from the border, the place we ran from as children, but which found us anyway. I do not know if this letter will reach you, but if it does, know this: I am safe. But I am not free. Not yet. Do you remember the game we used to play, beneath the rose tree? You would pretend to be the queen, and I would be your soldier. You always ruled with fairness. I always obeyed, until I didn't. Farida, they say. I crossed a line that no girl should, but the line was never mine. It was drawn by hands that never asked where we came from. I will not return. But I want you to know, I chose this path, not for rebellion, but because I finally saw who I was outside of our town, away from whispers, away from chalk and rules. Please take care of Amy. She won't understand, but you will. Yours in henna, Razia. Read the letter 3 times. Each time, the words etched themselves deeper into my chest, until it felt like my own hands had written them. She sent this when I asked my mother sipped her tea. 3 days before she disappeared for good. I waited for her to explain, but she didn't. She simply stared at the window again, as if waiting for someone to walk through it. Razia was my mother's cousin, though everyone in town had called her Wild Razia. She was the girl who'd worn boys' clothes to climb the mosque roof, who'd painted murals on the school wall with coal and Beetlejuice, who had once been caught teaching Urdu poetry to a group of Hindu boys across the railway tracks. Then, one monsoon, my mother said it was 1971, Razia had vanished. They said she'd eloped. Some whispered she'd gone across the border to marry a Sikh. Others claimed she had joined a women's movement in Delhi, but no one ever said she might have chosen her own story until now. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. My mother placed the cup down gently, because I didn't understand until now. She rose, walked over to the trunk in the corner, and knelt before it. It was the same blue trunk she'd brought with her from her father's house. Inside were clothes, books, glass bangles wrapped in old muslin, and at the bottom a worn cotton pouch, tied shut with a red ribbon. She handed it to me. I untied the knot. Inside were dozens of small items: a brass whistle, a rusted key, a pocket, Quran, and a notebook bound in jute cloth. It was a diary, filled in Razia's same delicate handwriting. The entries began in 1969. Most were simple. Walked to the mango orchard. Farida met me with boiled corn. Ma scolded me again. She doesn't like my stories. Finished the last line of Ghalib's Ghazal. My fingers hurt, but then the tone began to shift. They made fun of my hair again. I cut it off. I want to leave. But I don't know where leave begins. Farida says I think too much. I think she doesn't think enough. Then, dated July 17th, 1971. I left the chalk behind today, forever. No more lessons, no more rules, no more being the girl who says yes to everything. I kissed Farida on the forehead. She didn't notice, or maybe she pretended not to. I don't know if I'll be remembered, but I'll be real. Reading those lines was like stepping into someone else's breath. I looked up at my mother, who was staring into the pouch like it had just turned into a portal. She left because of you, I said softly. No, she corrected. She left because of us, because the town couldn't carry her weight, and neither could I. We sat in silence. The wind blew rain against the tin roof. Somewhere outside, a cow moaned softly, and the old rose tree swayed in the storm. That evening, I did something strange. I went to the rose tree, dug a shallow patch of earth near its roots, and buried Razia's diary inside a glass jar. Before sealing it, I added one thing of my own, a photograph of me and my mother, taken just last Eid. Because stories needed anchors, 2 days later, the monsoon stopped. The town shook itself off like a wet dog, and the streets returned to their routines. Children chased old tires down alleys, vendors hawked boiled eggs and chana, and women gathered at the well with brass pots and longer stories. But something inside me had changed. On the first clear evening, I went with my mother to the school. The gate squeaked, just as I remembered. But the chalkboard inside was blank. Madame Shabana had retired. My mother said there were talks of merging the school with a larger one near the railway station. The chalk I found on the windowsill felt like a relic. I picked it up and began to draw, not letters, not numbers, but a rose tree, its trunk bent from time, its leaves wild with memory, and at its center a tiny jar, glowing faintly beneath the soil. When I was done, I wrote one sentence in bold strokes: "Let those who vanish leave more than silence." My mother stood behind me, watching. Then, without a word, she picked up another piece of chalk and began drawing a girl. She gave her short hair, ink-stained hands, and a whistle around her neck. When we stepped back, we laughed. And just for a moment, it didn't feel like the end of anything. It felt like the start of a memory.